Do it.
Aloha, folks. It's Antonio with Hypnosis Product Reviews. Today I've got Melissa Tears all the way from New York via Pennsylvania. How you doing?
At the bakehouse.
So we were getting to this interview, I believe, last year, but we had a bunch of technical difficulties.
Yes, we did.
That was funny. We didn't think it was recording, and I found out I think I had like a good 15 minutes of us talking that they actually did record. So if you don't mind me asking, before we get into jump into the whole meat of this podcast, how did you get into hypnosis? I think I've heard on the background. How did you get into it?
It's so funny, it's every time this question is asked at this point, I want to give a different answer because so many people listen to these different interviews and podcasts, and there's so many different origin stories. It's like in my mind, it's almost like a neural network, and they go to all these different, separate and yet together pathways. I could talk about a mushroom trip when I was a teenager that really transformed the way I thought about perception and my brain and reality in general. That little bit of glimpse of something extraordinary that I then spent and continue to spend the rest of my life trying to get back without drugs. That moment where I understood something vital about consciousness. I could talk about when I was little being obsessed with altered states, from spinning and hyperventilating when I was 5, to smoking corn silk when I was 7.
That didn't do much for you, though.
No, actually it did. It made me really nauseous, which is one way of altering your state of mind. I could talk about, my fear of death, which from a very young age was a vital force, and so led me to try out almost any religion that came across my path. I come from a family where my mother was Jewish, my father was raised Catholic, but they were total atheists by the time they had, me, their 5th child.
Everybody else beat them up.
Yeah, 5 children, and they assumed there can't be a fucking God.
Yeah.
Clearly there's no God.
Yeah.
And so what that did, and it's funny, I take this lesson to heart because I have a daughter, is by not being given the answers. This is the way it is. This is life. I just have been a perpetual seeker, and I think I was pretty much every religion I could come across. Whoever my best friend was at the time, I would join their church, and whether it was Protestant, didn't like that one. Methodist, that was a little more amusing. I loved Catholicism for a while. I loved the ritual and
there's almost like a tinge of occultism in it.
Oh, a tint?
Oh, a lot of it. Many tinges.
So, at 13, I was a staunch atheist. I was like, okay, I have researched all of this, and you people and your crutches. And, that kind of shifted along the way. And I think back to, let me close the loop, and that mushroom trip where I was forced out of, this belief that I had adopted because the brain doesn't like uncertainty. And I was just looking for my own narrative, my own story. Anyway, so that's a long-winded answer to the origin. I can say that I was fascinated by altered states of consciousness, which led me to attend the noetic sciences and all of those weird consciousness explained conferences. And so for me, hypnosis was just another offshoot of that. I would go to the Monroe Institute and learn to synchronize my brain, and all of this while I was a rock and roll musician. So then I found this 3-day hypnosis class in New York. And I was like, ooh, that sounds interesting. And I went to that and just was absolutely hooked. And I went to another
fell in love.
And another 3-day. And another 3-day, and just kept and have not stopped since. Actually, I still continue to go. Either I travel to major workshops or I bring those trainers to me. So I'm always learning still.
That if you don't mind me interrupting, that's the big difference between some hypnotists or anybody that learns stuff like this is you're continually learning. Like, I got bit by this bug at an early age. The joke I tell people, I think it was 6 or 7. I can still remember clear as day. There was a bookshelf in my great grandma's house. Found Ellman's. I think it was a green book. Flipping through it, and as a young kid, young boys, you give them even the inkling that they can control people. Dude, I'm like, this is awesome. I remember.
Yes.
I actually went in my room. I was hypnotizing all my stuffed animals, and the joke is they all have somnambulism. And like my family, they thought I would like lose that bug, but no. Like, once you get bit by it, you can't.
It seems to be, or some people will lose it for a while and then they'll come back to it. You know, I always tell my students, you know, everyone is intrigued in one way or another with hypnosis. You never go to a networking event or a party and people are like, so what do you do? And you say, you know, I'm a hypnotist. And people just go, oh, yeah, I'm an accountant. No one does that. Everyone goes, you're a what? And they lean in. I mean, unless they lean back. And either way, it's amusing, right? So we all have this fascination. And whether we, you know, take it formally and dive into hypnosis or, right? You too, right?
Yeah, there's that trance. Let me turn this off.
So, you know, I think to get back to the origin, I think it's my curiosity that not only got me into this, but keeps me here. I tell my students that the real beautiful thing about this field is there's no cap on it. There's no point where you and I will be talking and I'll say, I know everything there is to know about hypnosis, or I know everything there is to know about the mind, or I know everything there is to know about the brain. You know, we don't even know, you know, what consciousness is yet. And so because of that, there is a never-ending exploratory expansion, you know, that
Bingo.
we get to play in. And so, you know, one of my loves is, you know, kind of diving into anything mind-related, mind-body related, consciousness-related, and then being able to take that and make it practical, right? So what can I do with this new study that they've just done in embodied cognition or priming? How can I use that, you know, immediately? And so for me, that's always a fun challenge, to translate it, to take, you know, what could be a bit of dry research and whip it into a bullet metaphor, you know, a story for a minute, because that's, you know, that's how people's, you know, can shift.
That's what you're talking about earlier, how we're the Twitter generation. We like everything.
Fortunately, and
small.
we won't even dive deeper into that fucked upness. But
one thing I really love about your attitude is that I don't know if you want to say it, the New York attitude, where people know me, I cuss like a sailor. Let me back up, a fucking sailor. The thing I remember, I think it was from 2 years ago, that you could probably attest to this. I'm sure you've seen in workshops or trainings where people are nervous to do things. They're nervous to do a demo. Be like, they might think that this person next to them knows more than them. What you told us, which just covers what you talked about, how there's never a cap on it. You told us, I can't remember if it's verbatim. You're like, look, I want you to fuck up intentionally, because you basically said all this is bullshit. Somebody had to make up the idea, because there's no parts.
Okay, wait.
Okay.
So years ago at HypnoThoughts, it wasn't last year, maybe it was the year before.
2 or 3 years ago, I think.
I was asked to do, you know, a commencement thing prior to HypnoThoughts. And I said the phrase that I always say to my students to get them to relax around, you know,
strangers.
Learning. Yeah. And, you know, so I say, look, this shit is all made up, you know, so relax around it. Every induction you love, everything that you take as gospel, every technique, every NLP pattern, it's all made up. And once you kind of get, you know, what I try and teach and hammer into my students is the simple structure underneath most change work processes. And once you get the simple structure of change, then you can create your own intervention. So it was really designed to make people relax so that they're not sitting there going, wait, what was step number 5 in the 6-step reframe? But what happened was I said this phrase, right? And over the course of Hypnothoughts, the weekend, because most of the trainers were at that party or whatever and heard my little, spiel, they kept quoting me, but they were misquoting me. And so somebody came up, like my students would come up laughing and they would say, oh my God, you should have heard so-and-so who just totally, misquoted you. And I'm like, how can you misquote? This shit is all made up. And yet you can. Because somebody went up there and said, like Melissa Tier says, it's all shit. And I'm like, no, that's not it. That's not it. And so one by one, people were coming up to me. So I was at the bar with like Michael Watson and maybe it was Scott Sandlin, Rich. We were at the bar and we were joking about how many different ways you can misquote that simple line. And as we were talking about it, somebody comes up and says, oh, they wanted like me to sign their book or something. And they said, I've been quoting you all weekend. And everybody got quiet and everyone turned towards this girl because we had just had this conversation. And this girl said, I've been saying, just like Melissa says, it's all bullshit. And I'm like, oh my God.
It's like, you're the one.
So I'm laughing and I try to tell her that that's not, what I meant really was, it's all, and I tried to correct her and she hung so tightly to this. She said, no, I have it recorded. I'm like, okay. So I'm sorry, but you said that you heard me say it's all made up shit, but that's not exactly it. It changes the meaning, but definitely, not just subtly, definitely.
I think
so, by telling people to go and I want you to, it was like maybe it was a handshake induction or something that most people are frightened of. When I say I want you to fuck this up 10 times, then people are like relaxed around it and they goof, and in goofing they're learning to get the subtle things,
intricacies.
And there's a great little study they did that proves this perfectly, right? And it was in, I forget what book I read it in, and it was about this pottery class where they broke the students into 2 groups. One group was told, you'll be graded on the pound, right? So it doesn't matter what it looks like. I want 50 pounds worth of pottery. The other group, they were told, take your time, give me your best piece to be graded. And at the end of this study, at the end of the semester, all of the pieces that won top grades and all the awards came from the people that were doing pottery per pound, because they were just doing it and cranking it out. And in cranking it out, you don't stress as much, but you also learn, right? You're learning the whole time, and there's no fear around just doing it. And so I take that to heart with students in my classes. It's get together, do this, turn to the person next to you, do this, because there's, especially with some of the things that people actually think are advanced and yet are not at all, like rapid inductions. Once you understand what's happening, it's easy to do, and once you know that there's not just one way to do it, that there's 100 ways to do it. And just because you learned this Bandlerian or Ericksonian pattern interrupt doesn't mean that's the only way to interrupt patterns. There's far more creative ways. I think I have a class at Hypnothoughts that is on arm catalepsy inductions, where it's just being playful. And too many times people are taught this very almost aggressive form of instant rapid inductions. And because I train therapists and psychiatrists, and they wouldn't use them. It wouldn't be useful and practical for their therapeutic business.
You don't want to rip somebody's arm out.
And it's ridiculous. Don't get me started on that subtle power play, which is, well, we won't go there. So I've created a bunch of different ways to do this in a far more therapeutic way, right? To make it gentle and yet effective as a pattern interrupt, or even a leverage induction. So I bring those there to counter a lot of the, street hypnotists or stage hypnotists that are like, bam, and it's, people are hesitant to do that, and they fucking should be, because unless you're on a stage or on the street, that's a little too abrupt for your therapeutic office. So there's ways of segueing it in and yet still utilizing these awesome inductions. So that's one of the workshops I'm doing. Maybe it's an hour, 2 hour or something.
The one workshop I want to definitely, I don't know, so many pre and post. Your pre that sounds really, really interesting. And that's the reason I like this. It's actually going to mark next month. Is going to mark a year of being clean off the booze, just because I found out that I didn't really need it. My joke with people is I'm allergic, and people are like, "Oh no, that's too bad." I'm like, "Yeah, I break out in handcuffs," and they laugh. I'm like, "No, I'm just the kind of person that does not need to drink."
I like that one.
You probably saw me at Hypnothoughts. I was with Watson, and I started getting really drunk, and then I just lose. Some people don't have that switch, and then I realized what happened. People say that aversion therapy doesn't work. It does for some people. I was at a bar.
Absolutely.
Last July, and girlfriend was we live 5 minutes away. Girlfriend was gonna leave me, and she wanted to leave, and I was like, you know what? Let's just stay here. And I was already getting obliterated at this point. The bartender behind me, we're friends with him. I heard him like this. It almost sounded like, "I'm so disappointed in you," like that dad voice. I heard him behind me say, "God, please don't do that." And as soon as I heard that, it made me so embarrassed. I was so full of shame. That was the aversion therapy I needed. That simple intervention.
Everyone has their forms, right? Their those moments. But what's funny is many people don't need those moments. In other words, if you really want to look at the research on addiction protocol, and there's been a few amazing studies where they've studied, 700,000 people. And, unfortunately, most of the studies that people usually cite come from the treatment facilities. And it's unfortunate, because even when they have a definite bias, that 12-step bias, the percentages of success are so abysmal that it's ridiculous. You are far more apt to get over an addiction if you never buy into that treatment protocol. And the research pans this out. I mean, even hypnotists don't want to believe that 90% of people that used to smoke and don't, they quit on their own, cold turkey.
Yeah.
Not with a pill, not with a patch, not with some gum, not with a hypnotist. They quit on their own for their own reasons. We outgrow these things. Most college people that binge drank in college outgrew it. Well, what most people don't realize is 70% of heroin users outgrow it organically. Naturally, it runs its course. Cocaine users, they outgrow it. The majority of people that are actually using cocaine, there is 10% of them would be classified as dependent. Everyone else just does it socially on a rare occasion. People don't want to talk about this because we've been bombarded with this, this abstinence or nothing. This, either you say, I have given up power, I am powerless against this, I trust my higher power to do this thing, or you're doomed. And that has been the leading form, certainly in this country, which is so detrimental. If you look at the treatment protocol from a hypnotist perspective, and you realize that once you enter into the treatment cycle, you are so much more likely to have a life of continual recovery, relapse, because you, at a very vulnerable point, are taking in certain ideas that create a cyclical loop, right? If you truly believe that you have a disease and that there is no cure, and one, hit off a joint or one sip of a beer means What does it mean? It means you've fallen off the wagon. You've got to go down, hit rock bottom to start over again. So this just creates this situation where people believe they have a disease. They are powerless against it. Once they have a sip of beer, all is for naught, and they have to go down this cycle. So part of what I do is I take all of the research and I've designed a protocol which does the opposite of what many, unfortunately, many of the current mandated treatment protocols do. And that is I empower people. So in my protocol, there's a few levels to it. The first level is I give addicts 6-7 different ways to stop a craving immediately. More importantly than stopping a craving is also stopping the preceding emotion. Whatever that stress is, whatever the shame is, the grief, the fear, the anxiety, I give them these techniques that are designed to rewire the habituated pattern in the brain. And because we are a holistic mechanism, anything that changes the brain is going to change the biochemistry involved in the whole system, right? So first level is I arm addicts with different ways of getting out of unwanted states and rewiring their brain. The second level is I work with them to neutralize the environmental triggers inside and outside, right? So we neutralize their effect. That stimulus response that triggers the automatic program to run in the brain, we got to neutralize those particular triggers. The third layer is we've got to deal with the deeper roots, right? There has been some amazing studies, the ACE study, where the higher you rate on the early childhood adversity scale, the higher you rate of, maybe being a child of alcoholics or addicts, or emotional or physical abuse, or, death of a parent, all of these lead people to be more susceptible to addiction. And so the third level is to go a little deeper. And so I've created an easy, portable system that's totally adaptable for every single client. And more importantly, this same system, although this weekend we're focusing on addictions, I think that we are just as addicted to our negative emotional state. So for me, a habit is not just drinking or smoking or doing drugs or biting your nails, or these habits that we all agree are habits, overeating. Habits are also habits of thought, habits of emotion. Anxiety is a habit, right? Pain on many levels is a habit. It's a habituated pattern in the mind, in the body, in the brain. And so a lot of people who take my addictions protocol, they then kind of put that into almost any client interaction, because our clients come to us because they're stuck, right? They're stuck in a habituated way of thinking, of feeling, of doing. And so this protocol is adaptable for any habit. And that, that kind of pretty much takes care of what most people see. So I try to make it applicable for everybody, even though not everyone is working with, people with substance abuse.
With what you're saying, I know I've got a glimpse into it from reading this little bad boy, it's backwards, Antianxiety toolkit.
Yeah.
It's funny when you're talking about your twofold approach. I was actually looking at it yesterday, so I'm gonna plan on reviewing this for a blog post. And I know you're talking about here how you have that twofold approach where you teach them how to stop the anxiety that's a precursor to the habit, and then you also show them, like you're saying. No, that's fine. And then I think your dog wants to get a little airtime, and then you talk about how you can. Hey
Gussie, come on. Sorry.
That's fine. And then you talk about how you reprogram the triggers, or reprogram the response to the triggers. Now, one thing I want to ask, is I had done AA a long time ago, and I found out the AA did not work for me. Because some people it works for, I know that, but I think that the 5%, they say 5 to 10% it works for.
No, honey.
No, I've seen it about 5%.
It's smaller than that.
Yeah.
Even
But,
by AA standards.
yeah. Okay, let's pretend
yes,
it's,
for the people it works for, let me just say this. The other piece, right? The people it works for, what works for them is to have a supportive group,
yeah.
right? A supportive group. So, you know, in my working with addicts, I'm always trying to get them to join groups that are not groups of people telling their, oh, my addiction is worse than yours, my rock bottom is worse than yours. It's groups that are about something they want, something they're leaning towards. So I have at the Open Center catalog in my office, and I say, check, you know, there's a class for everybody, and meet a group of people that are interested in writing, that are interested in spiritual, you know, things, that are interested in philosophy. There's practical philosophy classes and groups. And, you know, here's a list of cool things where you can meet supportive people, but you're not just sitting there brainwashing each other by trying to one-up each other on your misery. So that doesn't help. So there's also that. There's also, you know, so when AA works, it's because people find a place where they belong. And that connection is what's missing in most addicts' life. So there is that as well.
You know what I want to say? What I was actually going to say, let's just pretend for shits and giggles it is 5%. That find help. There might be a strong correlation with I've heard that studies saying that 5% find what's it called, a natural remission, meaning that they were just gonna do it no matter what, like you said earlier, that they were gonna find a way out of it no matter what.
Of course.
And the other thing,
and can I just take exception to that fucking word?
Yeah.
This is not a disease, right?
Okay,
so
yeah.
The fact that they say spontaneous remission is still buying into that disease model, but you're absolutely correct. And it's actually, you know, those are the people that go into treatment. The people that have outgrown their addiction naturally, which in that latest study, thousands and thousands of people did, you know, those are the people that don't go into the AA cycle. But even the AA cycle, the percentage, a lot of the researchers are saying probably would have outgrown it. I don't like the spontaneous remission because it's not a disease. It used to be thought of that the one thing that creates addiction is the actual substance, that it somehow alters the brain. Well, now we know that's bullshit. You know, the brain gets altered through use, right? And it's not the use of the drug, it's the behavior, right? I mean, addiction is a compelling habituated pattern. It utilizes many regions in the brain, and you know, and it creates a kind of easy to navigate neural associative cluster, right? That's powerful. So I'm not saying it's not powerful, but if it was the physical drug, then as a lot of researchers have already pointed out, if your grandma goes into the hospital for a hip replacement and is given the most powerful opiates, why wouldn't she come out and start hitting the streets for some, you know, heroin? Or the people in, you know, Vietnam, who they were so afraid were going to come back, and, you know, the country was going to be overrun by these vets who were addicted to heroin. As soon as they came back and got out of that, what some people would say, the impoverished cage, and found themselves in a better cage with social interactions and things to do, they didn't need the drug anymore. So if it is a disease, and the disease is you know, is there because somehow the substance has altered the brain, which is not true, then gambling, which what is that substance that has altered the brain? What is the sex addiction, porn addiction, you know, shopping addiction? It's like, so all these things start to, you know, break down that disease model in the brain, and you start to look at neuroplasticity. The brain is designed to take the shape of experience. That's what it's there for. It's designed to go after pleasure and run from pain. And so here's a drug that does that. The brain rallies to it because that's what's being practiced. And so the brain changes that people have noticed over the years when they look and they say, well, an addict's brain is different. Like, yeah, okay, well, so is a London taxi cab driver. His brain is different. Look at the density there, where his brain navigates things. Look at how different it is from someone who's not a London taxi driver. Anyway, don't get me started on the bullshit.
I want to ask you about the London taxi cab driver after reading this
that's
book.
That's why I brought it up, because I know you just held up that book.
Is there a difference between a London taxi cab driver and a New York taxi cab driver?
Yeah. One has to actually know the streets and the fastest way to get from here to there. They have to study for a year and pass tests.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, yeah.
The other aspect of AA, which I don't know if I've read this somewhere or it's something I naturally started to adopt and started to believe, that the whole thing, I think one of the big premises of AA and 12-step is the whole relapse thing. If everybody all of a sudden recovers, there's nothing to talk about. They have nobody to talk about, and somebody has to take the role of the relapser.
And I do want to say this. I mean, you and I could sit here and I can knock down all the steps and show you that maybe of the 12 steps, there's maybe 3 that are useful for individuals, insight-oriented, looking at their behavior, right? All of this. But there's so many that, in my opinion, as a hypnotist, are so full of negative presuppositions as well as negative suggestions, right? I'm powerless. There's 2 that are designed that literally say, I ask God to take away my defects. That's like step 5 or something. And then there's another one. I ask God to take away my so for someone like me, who doesn't necessarily believe in an external deity that has the power to help me, but doesn't unless I pray to them or unless I give up power. What the fuck kind of God is that?
Yeah.
We won't go there. So all of this, I do want to stress that if people are in my office and AA is working for them, I am the biggest cheerleader of AA then. I work within people's belief systems. So if they say, oh, I've been sober for, 10 years, clean and sober, then I am me and their higher power. We are on their side. And so I would never challenge something that's working. So when somebody says, oh, clean and sober, I'm like, yes. They're like, yeah, my higher power. I'm like, yes. Well, I'm going to show you a technique where you can have access to your higher power. It's really interesting. And I'll take them into trance and I'll work within that system. If somebody comes in and says, I tried AA, but it didn't work for me, I'm like, yeah, it didn't work for me either. But here's something that will. You know what I mean? So I don't want people listening to think that I'm just bashing AA to my clients. I'm not. I'm looking at AA from a hypnosis perspective and pointing out all of the areas. Now, Scott Sandlin, who is a really good friend of mine, and hypnothoughts is his baby, he's always pointing out, well, the 12 steps are all done in the past tense. I'm like, you know what? Right, Scott. So that's what I say to him. Sure, Scott. And that makes a difference to you and I as a hypnotist, that you're going to put that behind you. But I want you to sit in and listen to the addicts talk, because they haven't taken that on. But Scott does really good work because he reframes it in the past tense.
Yeah.
Because he's got ways of taking the 12-step program, reframing it in a way that empowers people, right? So, we disagree on how useful those steps are. And I guess if they're going to be useful, then certainly his way is better.
Yeah.
But I do want you to understand, and people listening, that I'm not going to argue if something is working for people. Me personally, I find the whole entire system is not only disempowering. I went through it. I was one of those people locked up and absolutely told that I was either going to die if I didn't get on, this was the phrase, get on your knees and accept Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. Now, people will argue that was a counselor who should never have said that, because even in the steps, it says, you ask God or however you see him. Like, that's their nod to who? I don't know, because it's still a him, and it still presupposes that there's this God that is male, that is someone I would beg to take away my defects. But I went and complained to the 2 other people who were in charge of that facility, and they backed up that guy. So basically I was, you know, very young and told I was going to either die or be imprisoned, but I would never get straight without giving into this system. Now, for someone like me, luckily, I was already a punk rocker. I was already, you know, a punk rock musician. So that actually worked for me because it became a fuck you, watch me.
Yep, I could totally see you doing that.
Right. And so I got straight because I was told I couldn't. But not many people are already armed with this natural tendency to buck any system, right? And so for me, it worked in reverse psychology terms, but as a hypnotist, seeing this, and I work with a lot of teens, you know, their brains are not fully wired until, you know, they're 22, 23. So there's a few things that are going to happen if they buy into this system. So I'm always there to kind of catch and reframe what needs to be reframed when it comes to addiction. I like the fact that, you know, I am someone that they can relate to because I share that with people. I say, look, I've been there, you know, and it's done. So anyway, we've been going on for like 40 minutes. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about? I also have a post-conference, which is 1 day of my Coaching the Unconscious Mind. Where
is that the one where you is that the Metapattern from Overdurf?
So I use John Overdurf. In case you don't know his work, you should know his work. Go to
brilliant guy.
He's one of my closest and dear friends at this point, and I bring him to my students every year. And now we like to go and hang out on beaches together. So John is my favorite. I also think he's one of the most brilliant minds in the field. So I use his coaching pattern as the skeleton, right? To bring in more of the processing in embodied cognition and ways to use priming, ways to use a lot of the research there, and how to use nonverbal communication to kind of start to flow into the spatial awareness and the all of these things. So it's spatial language, temporal language, it's nonverbal communication, it's understanding ways of shifting and slightly tweaking the unconscious strategies that people already have within them. And so there's, it's 1 day where I use that coaching model, the Metapattern, right? So to me, if you know that pattern, everything else is gravy. If you get that, then you can make up your own interventions and you will create lasting change. So I take that and I build on that 4-step structure, how to make sure you're also hitting the key component parts for memory reconsolidation, right? So how to literally rewire the brain rapidly by utilizing the way that memories reconsolidate and by throwing in the necessary features. A lot of people, they just think that all you have to do is recall a memory and then, do something and it will reconsolidate. Although it's true on a very small scale, if you want real massive change, you have to hit certain key component pieces. And that is newer research that has come about, after I co-wrote a book, Keeping the Brain in Mind. So it's almost like, wait,
hey,
now we know a bit more.
Where's my spotlight?
Simplify it, right? So so I've been trying to get that out there because I think that it wasn't gone into enough, or the book was broader. And now we need to shine, right, like you said, a spotlight on how to use therapeutic reconsolidation. So there's that too. So it's a day where I'm building in and layering in a bunch of these things because I think it's vital to what we do. It lends itself to a more dynamic form of change work, right? And hypnosis without formal trance. So yeah, it'll be fun.
I love this stuff. So your pre-conference is going to be your addiction workshops. That's 2 days, right?
Yeah. It's
Two.
the Wednesday and Thursday right before the conference. And by the way, if you haven't booked your room, you've got to call with the discount code. You can't do it online anymore, but for those nights, pre and post, it's $45 a night. It's insane. Like, what hotel is that?
You know, we
anyway, and then it's $85 for the weekend. So I would book now, and to me, it's like the cheapest way to learn. And there are many amazing trainers at this conference.
Oh yeah.
I you know, so many times it's like, if I wasn't teaching, I'd be going to this one or this one or this one. You know, it's I'm still working on by location, but I haven't perfected that yet. But there's so much to choose from, and that's where the problem is going to come in.
You know, I can't wait to finally get a chance to meet James Tripp. There's so many amazing people that are going to be here.
You know, James was just at my center. I just sponsored him for a workshop. So
awesome.
I got to hang out with him a lot. And he's one of those people that I'm really excited to watch him grow. You know, I mean, to me, it's the next generation of people that are exploring and expanding his model. And he's just a lovely guy. You'll just, you'll adore him.
Awesome. So
and if I wasn't teaching, I'd be going to his. And
I imagine
now I am pitching his class instead of mine, but he's definitely worth it. And I know he's doing a workshop in the meet of the conference.
He's doing something in the meet of the conference I planned. I already printed my schedule out, went over everything, and then he's doing a post. He's doing a post. And then your post is on the Metapattern, which folks, definitely check out that one as well. I was at their little teaser you had, I think it was the last year or the year before. Amazing process. Very simple. Very simple.
And here's what's beautiful about it. It's really simple. So in the first pass, most people get it. And they get the change. But the thing about this pattern is, just like John Overdurf, you can continue expanding and mastering and putting layers in and all of this cool stuff. So, you know, it's something that I never get tired of teaching or even learning, because there's so many layers to it. It's the structure of change. And then from there, what do? So you bring in all of the other things that you're learning. What is it you're looking at?
No, I found my windows. You saw me looking around. I hit something. My windows shot around. Okay,
because
that's your.
At first I thought, you know, I'm watching your eye accessing cues, and I realized, no, he is not processing something right there that I'm saying.
No,
this has nothing to do with what I'm saying.
No, because the windows usually are like side by side on Zoom, but then somehow my finger hit something.
No worries.
Don't worry, I'm a complex being with many eye accessing cues.
You are indeed, my friend. Anything else you want from me?
I think we got everything covered. So, folks.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. I've got quite a few things going on. Once again, my pre-conference, although it's geared towards addictions, please understand it can be taken into pretty much any client session. So, folks, the pre-conference, or if you look above or below, you'll see links for the pre and post-conference. She's right. Get your rooms. I just registered our rooms, and if it wasn't for my girlfriend being on top of me, being like register, I take forever to do stuff. So, folks, we'll see you in Vegas. All right. See you in a couple of months.